Hi everyone, I'm Sostine and welcome to my channel in this merry month of October. Honestly, Halloween is my favorite holiday of the year and it's been so much fun sewing Tim Burton-esque outfits this entire month. Earlier this month, I made my son a Beetlejuice costume that I ended up having to dye yellow in order to make it a Beetlejuice costume in order to get him to wear it. But before I had settled into making him a hand-striped suit, I had actually purchased several yards of some beautiful black and white cotton poly blend fabric at $5 a yard, now on sale for $4. I had actually bought 8 since the first 4 yards I bought got lost in the mail and I bought it again, only to have the first batch show up about 2 weeks later. Since I knew that the fabric was so stiff, I didn't actually end up using it for my son because he has a tendency to refuse stiff fabrics. I decided that instead of letting it go to waste, I would use it on myself. In particular, I had always wanted to make myself a short day dress version of the Sleepy Hollow dress. You may recall I made myself a screen accurate version last year using silk taffeta and around 64 fabric markers because I ended up striping the fabric myself just like the original. That one is currently at the Museo in California, but I wanted to make myself one that I could wear every day. And that's when this fabric came in. I feel like making a day dress that encompasses the feel of an 18th century gown has been on the bucket list of so many different costumers. Even Bernadette Banner made a really beautiful floral one at some point, edged with red satin. I thought this would be a great time to make that for myself. I decided to draw it out first. For mine, I wanted to give it the conical bodice shape of the 18th century, the rounded neckline like the original dress, and a full skirt. I wasn't sure if I would make it close in the front or the back, but I was definitely going to have the lines in the front that is so typical of 18th century zone front dresses, just like the original. However, I wanted the sleeves to be a little bit more loose. You'll notice that all of my house dresses have this like loose bishop sleeve thing going, and I wanted this dress to have it to be the same just because it's more comfortable for me personally. I believe that if you're going to sew an outfit for someone, you sew it for that person and make it customized to that person's likes and dislikes. As for the skirt, I wanted it to have a circular skirt that would flare out properly, but I wasn't entirely sure if I would have enough to make the overskirt so I could wear it retroussé in the back, just like the original Sleepy Hollow dress. So I didn't draw it in here, but I had it mentally in my head. Last year, I figured out that the stripes were approximately 1 inch for the black stripes and 1 1/8 inches for the white stripes. But my fabric was exactly 1 inch white and 1 inch black. I figured it was close and it would work well enough for my gown. Now that I had a dress idea and the fabric, I decided to start by drafting the pattern. Before I get into that, I would like to cut away to Sponsorship Steam for a special message. Hi everyone, Sponsorship Steam here. I want to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform that has thousands of online classes in so many different topics. You can learn calligraphy, complete with free downloadable sheets, to how to use video editing software, to how to draw, and how to make your own YouTube videos. I have learned so many different things for daily life using Skillshare, as well as how to make this very video. Right now, I'm taking a Skillshare original class by the Bernadette Banner. She filmed a class with Skillshare called Hand Sewing Basics, Work Wonders with Fabric, Needle, and Thread, where she goes into the absolute basics of sewing. So even if you don't know how to load a thread onto a needle, she goes into all of that. And even for me, who considers herself a more seasoned seamstress, there's so much I'm learning from her. For instance, I didn't know the different names of the different needle sizes, and it's kind of blown my mind. It's also been fun relearning and perfecting the basic stitches with her. For instance, I learned how to strengthen my back stitch. You'll notice all the classes are broken down into smaller chunks, 10 minutes or less for the most part, so that I can learn in bite-sized pieces that are never overwhelming for my busy day. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Now, back to Sostine. Thank you, Sponsorship Steam, for sharing all that. Now, let's get started on making this dress. I mentioned that I want to have this dress to have the 18th century shape and give it to me without having to put on a separate corset or stays underneath. To achieve this plan, I plan on having a bodice that was completely boned and form-fitting, but not tight, so that I would actually have that proper 18th century shape. So I got my dress form that I had made while I was wearing an 18th century stay and started drafting the pattern onto it. Now, just a note, most people don't already have a dress form with an 18th century stays molded onto it. I highly recommend either a bootstrap or a duct tape dress form, and then lacing your stays on top of it to the same waist size and bust size as you. So to draft this, what I did was I got my dress form and some 1/8 inch tape and drew out the shape of the dress that I wanted. I then got some cotton muslin and then pinned it onto the dress form for each piece and traced it out with a pencil. One note, I did know I wanted the dress to be looser than my dress form, so I added 1/8 of an inch to each side of the pattern. This was a personal choice since I wanted this dress to be comfortable enough that I'd wear it on a daily basis, even with the boning. I made a muslin and tried it on myself. I won't show this for modesty's sake, but I assure you that it fit really well and I was very happy with it, so I moved on to the next step. Now it's time to make the actual dress. I wanted most of the structure to be in the lining, mostly because this black and white fabric is actually quite thin and I knew it would not be able to handle the strain of actually being the base fabric. However, I didn't want to go as far as to use coutil, which is the original corset fabric and is very stiff. So I ended up using a cotton twill I have in the house. I use this for so much and I buy this by the bolt since I use it so frequently. Then I cut out the pattern pieces with a 5/8 inch seam allowance and then stitched it together. Afterwards, I went to my iron and opened up each seam. To make the boning channels, I then stitched a boning channel 3/8 of an inch away from each seam. This allows me to put a 4mm piece of synthetic whalebone into each channel, so that would be 2 pieces of boning at each seam. Now for the front, I just folded up the angled section with a 1-inch seam allowance and put in the piece of boning at the fold. The very front stomacher portion will be added later, but I want to finish the back and the sides first. I then cut out the pieces of black and white striped fabric and sewed it together. I did take time to match the stripes as best as I possibly could because I wanted the stripes to match up to the movie version. Where I messed up a little, I did take a black Arteza fabric marker to fill in these areas. I ironed open all the seams and then matched it up with the lining at the neckline, and then stitched it with a 5/8 inch seam allowance all the way around. I clipped the neckline and then turned it inside out, ironing it all flat so that the right side was on the outside. I did make each boning piece 1 inch smaller than the length of each seam so that there would be enough fabric to turn around for the seam allowances at the bottom and the top. I made this around 2 inches smaller at the side so that while the side seams are still stiffened and have some support, the chance of the boning poking into my armpit and causing discomfort is minimal. Now, if you count this up, you will notice that there are 14 pieces of boning in total. I know this seems like a lot, but 4mm synthetic whalebone is actually not all that stiff, so having 2 pieces like this is actually necessary to give any amount of support. I then matched it up to the lining at the waistline and then manually turned up the seam allowances and then put the 2 wrong sides together and sewed it together using a running stitch around 8 to the inch. Now, instead of matching stripes up for this area, I simply used white silk thread to sew everything and then painted those white pieces black on the black stripes using Arteza fabric markers. For the neckline, I simply got a machine and stitched the neckline together. I pinned the front angle pieces together as well and then used the machine to sew it flat. I know it's not particularly pretty, but the front edge of the neckline will be completely covered with ruffle trim, so this is not a concern for me. Well, more like it was a concern and it really did bother me before the trim was on there, but I decided to ignore it. After that, I got the stomacher ready. I cut out the pieces and prepped them. Once I did that, I pinned it onto the sides of the dress and then stitched it with a very unfortunate looking machine stitch that I again reminded myself would be covered up with trim. I knew I wanted it to be center closing with a white stripe down the very front, just like the original Sleepy Hollow dress. So I went to close it right there in the center stripe. I thought about the different ways that I could close it, including hooks and eyes or lace, and even pinning. But then I chose to make it to have hooks and eyes so that I could close it easily. I got some larger size 2 Dritz hooks and bars and then stitched them onto the front of the bodice every 1.25 inches, starting from the very top. For the sleeves, I wanted to mimic the yellow chemise a la Reine dress that I had. And I initially tried to draft a mock-up of it, but I eventually gave up and went to my go-to cottagecore sleeve, the Gibson Girl blouse pattern. Took out the pattern and just made it 3 inches shorter because that's how long I wanted the sleeves to be. I cut out the fabric pieces and sewed it together. Please note that the raw edges of the inside were serged on my Baby Lock Victory serger, so machine washing it would not be a problem in the future since I do plan on wearing this dress on a daily basis without having to worry about it getting dirty and not being able to wash it. I gathered up the bottom of the sleeve and attached it to the armband. I did make the armband a little wider so that I could sew trim onto it later. To make the armband, I stitched it closed at one end, trimmed it a little, and then folded over a 1/2 inch seam allowance on one end. I then stitched the other end to the gathered sleeve bottom and then stitched it together on my Baby Lock Soprano machine with a 3mm stitch. I then added the sleeves onto the bodice top. To do this, I sewed along the bottom 6 inches of the sleeve to the armhole ungathered. I then gathered up the rest of the top of the sleeve with a 5mm stitch and then pulled it until it fit the armhole properly. All in all, these gathered bishop sleeves are so easy to install as well as move around in that they have absolutely become my favorite sort of sleeve for house dresses, so I highly recommend this pattern. I was absolutely loving how this was going. I realized then that I had a good 5 yards of fabric left after making the bodice, which meant that I definitely had room to add both the circular underskirt as well as the 18th century-esque overskirt. So that's where I started with the overskirt. I got 2 pieces of fabric that I cut selvage to selvage around 30 inches wide and about 60 inches long because that's the selvage to selvage. I serged the top edge and then seamed the 2 long pieces at the center back as well as hemming the edges as well as the bottom. And then I painted the white thread on the black stripes black so that it would match. I then gathered it to the width of the bodice, making sure to match up the stripes as you can see. I then stitched it to the bodice. Now here I thought it would be harder to just paint the silk thread black, so I did use both black and white silk thread, 2 needles at the same time, so that I could match up the thread to the right colored stripe. I was actually quite proud of my stripe matching here, as you can see, and I really love how it turned out. I cut out the circle skirt and then stitched it together. Now I use an old simplicity pattern to cut mine. Now for my own sanity, I did add pockets on the right side. Since the skirt will be worn under the dress, I didn't particularly feel the need to add in a nice looking waistband that matched. Instead, I just got some white double folded bias tape, pinned it to the raw edge at the top, and then stitched it with a machine. I then pinned it to the back of my finished bodice on the underside, and then used a strong 30 weight silk thread to stitch it onto the bodice lining. I used hooks and eyes at the waistband to close it. I also added some hooks and eyes to the bodice front and the skirt top so that the front of the skirt would not be pulled downwards so that you could see my flesh right here in between. I really hate the way that looks, so that was a nice easy fix for it. For the hems, I folded up the fabric 1/2 inch twice to enclose the raw edge and then stitched it down with a machine stitch. I then used fabric markers to color in all the black stripe areas black. Now it was time for the trim. The original dress has a 2-inch wide trim with a silk cut raw and then frayed a little. While I think that looks beautiful and works marvelously for silk, fraying cotton is a different matter and it doesn't look as good or neat. So what I did was cut a piece of fabric around 5 stripes wide. I then ironed a black and a white stripe all the way down the edge. You'll notice the back has an area of overlap so that by sewing down the middle, I'm running through the overlapped area so that the edges don't need to be otherwise hemmed. I gathered this down 2:1 ratio, meaning that I use a 30 weight silk thread around 6 to the inch to do a running stitch around 12 inches and then would gather that 12 inches down to around 6 or 2:1. I would then toss a knot in it and then move on to the next section. This way, the gathers stay relatively in place. I then pinned the dress along the front edge, around the neckline, and then back down the other side. I backstitched this in place using a white silk thread. I also put the same ruffle trim on the sleeve edges. The dress was almost done at this point, but it needed one last thing. I stitched some vintage Victorian glass buttons right at the waistline in the back, and then put a piece of black silk ribbon in between the underskirt and the overskirt. This way I can button this upwards and then it can hook onto the button, and that actually makes the skirt gathered up and it makes it worn retroussé. And the dress was done. I can't lie, I am madly in love with this dress. I want to show how this dress actually closes since it's a bit confusing, but I'll do it on my dress form so you can see it. Now you're supposed to step into the dress and then hook the skirt closed first. Afterwards, you hook the center front of the bodice closed. And then there are hooks on the side front that lets the front of this bodice and the skirt stay together. Afterwards, I then loop up the back of the skirt so that it's worn retroussé. Overall, it's so comfortable and the pocket is useful and it still gives you that 18th century shape, which I love. I have scanned in my personal pattern, and if you're interested, you can go to my Etsy store and pick up the PDF so you can make your own. I went pumpkin picking with my son at the local Eckert's Farm in it, and I felt so perfectly Halloween-y, and the dress really does just go with everything. And since it's a cotton poly blend, while it's a little stiffer, it also doesn't wrinkle all that easily, so it really kept up with my activity level really well. Thank you for watching. I had so much fun making this dress. If you like making pretty house dresses or 18th century gowns, I do make both on this channel along with random other accessories. So if you like this video, please remember to give this a like and subscribe if you want other dress or sewing content. I think I said that I was going to start like talking about what I wear all the time. So I don't know how many of you have even heard of a Japanese anime called Violet Evergarden. I think that her main dress is so pretty. So I actually bought the cosplay from a shop on Etsy. It's custom made to my measurements. As you can see, it fits really well. However, the problem is that I actually hate the jacket. So I've just been kind of wearing the dress as a house dress. It's beautifully sewn. I haven't tried machine washing it yet, but I just kind of love the idea of wearing secret cosplays that I know about and maybe some other geeks who know about me, but for other people, this is just like a pretty dress. So